Hi, friends, and welcome back to The Objective Hindu. Sorry for the long hiatus. I'm back with a new video. And in this video, and over the next 15 or 20 minutes, I want to talk to you about the recently concluded American elections, Donald Trump, why I think he won, Kamala Harris, why I think she and the Democrats lost, and then just share some personal thoughts on what would I have done in the hypothetical event of being an American citizen who had to choose who to vote for. So I think Trump's election is a very interesting sociological phenomena for anyone who is sort of interested in politics and how people behave and how they make choices. I think it marks a very interesting sort of turning point in American politics, but actually not just in American politics, I'd say just in global politics. And it's not for the reasons that you might suspect. I'm not talking about this from the point of view that he's going to come in and do some sort of radical things, etc. I think the fact that we have a phenomena where people just simply choose to vote for someone who, irrespective of what he says or does, commands the support of, I don't know, 46%, 47% of the country unconditionally. So, when he won the last time, he had, I think 2016, he had about 48% of the vote or something. When he lost, he had 46% of the vote. And this time when he won, he has 49.9% of the vote. So we're talking about a delta of like 2 to 2.5 percentage points in a highly educated and sort of developed country. And you expect people to change their opinion on something based on evidence and what someone is saying and what they can read about him and what others are saying about him, other very established people. So I think this is a very interesting sociological phenomena because the way he has managed to win, contrary to what a lot of people in the media are making out to be, it's not a landslide in my opinion at all. He's won like every other American president, wins by 2 to 3 percentage points. That's the swing vote. But here's a guy who's been convicted of a felony. He's been impeached twice. He says ridiculous things, which are just too many to list. But somehow it has zero impact on his popularity. In fact, if anything, the more ridiculous he is, the more popular he becomes amongst his supporters and even among some of his non-supporters, or at least historically his non-supporters. And I really don't have an explanation for why that's the case, but I think we can all agree that this is the case that is propelling him to his popularity. Now, of course, there are many other causes on the other side, which I'll talk about in a second. There are also a couple of very interesting sort of things that are going for him, which are hard to explain. For example, he's hardly a Republican, firstly. He just happened to be using the Republican platform because he has to choose one. I don't think he espouses any sort of proper conservative values, either on the social side or on the economic side. For example, he talks about trade tariffs and trade wars, which is the antithesis of what the Republican Party and the small government deregulation crowd should be clamoring for. One very interesting thing about Trump is how he manages to get the support of people who should have really no reason to support him. For example, I would argue that the evangelicals and the Christians, who, while they have always traditionally voted Republican, I don't think have any reason to support Trump. He's hardly the beacon of a good Christian or a good Catholic, in my assessment. I think he's been married thrice. I think he's in multiple legitimate children, probably more illegitimate children if someone was to account for them. But somehow the evangelical lobby in the US, which can be quite influential, especially when we think about that core voter base for the Republican Party, they support him unconditionally, irrespective of what he says, what he does, and what his own personal conduct has been like. Similarly, you might have heard that his support amongst white women and Latino men increased this time around. Now, white women, I think, is very interesting again because there was a time when to vote for him was like the unthinkable thing to do. Then it became the acceptable but wrong thing to do, and now it's becoming not just the acceptable but also the cool thing to do. So, the more you want to show that you are out there and you really care about the country and that you actually have an opinion on things, the more I find that these people tend to support Trump because it's almost like a statement that they're making to their neighbors. which a few years ago was hardly the case. Same thing with Latinos, and a lot of people were surprised that when he so clearly criticizes your immigrants, etc., and often targets the sort of Latin American countries, how come he has support from the Latinos in America? Now, it's worth just spending a minute on this. This is a very well understood phenomena because lots of immigrant groups, once they become sort of assimilated and absorbed in the sort of mainstream society that they immigrate to, they often turn conservative and they often start to vote for people who will ensure that no more like them will show up there. So, the Indians, for example, the Indian Americans traditionally were all very sort of democratic leaning, but now more and more, as they become more and more successful in the US, also tend to now vote increasingly on the Republican side. And so there's almost this idea that the Latinos, and of course not all of them are illegal immigrants to the US. There are many legal immigrants as well, but many of them were illegal in the manner in which they came into the US and then became legalized. I think that's probably the vast majority of people there. They certainly don't necessarily associate themselves with the present day Latinos who are trying to scramble across the border into the US. So, and they're very well aware of the fact that if those of the millions of those people who are trying to come in, many of them, of course, successfully, if they're all to make it there, it will only hamper their own prospects in the US. So, again, it's not surprising that that particular group also supports Trump, even though it seems very counterintuitive for them to be supporting a person who, in quotes, is against immigrants and against Latinos. I think Trump did an excellent job fooling the nation about the sort of issues at hand, whether it was inflation. No one, and I listened to both of his debates, and no one really pushed back on the big question around where did all this inflation start. Let me tell you, it started during COVID when, under Trump's presidency, there was quantitative easing, aka printing of free money, to the tune of $6 trillion. Trump added more debt. Keeps talking about Biden's economic policies and inflation and the fact that the Democrats are adding more debt. By the way, every president in the recent US history adds more debt than the previous president just by nature of the size of the economy. So Trump added more debt as a percentage than any other recent president in the history. So actually, Biden as a percentage added less debt than Trump. So again, he managed to fool the people that Biden's the bad guy. I'm not saying that Biden is not the bad guy. All I'm saying is that Trump hardly fared any better. Then he said things around war and the sort of global economy, the global state of affairs, and how if he would have been in office, there would have been no war in Russia and Palestine, etc. Again, without any fundamental basis. And then people, his supporters, show the fact that during his 4 years of presidency there was no war, as if correlation indicates causation. There were many such things that didn't happen during his 4 years. I mean, during Biden's presidency, there was no new virus that came about. The ones that already existed were out there, and there was no sort of new pandemic. Should Biden therefore claim that because of his presidency, no new virus came about? I mean, this is sort of ridiculous, right? But that is as ridiculous as the claim that Russia didn't invade Ukraine when Trump was in power is in my mind. There are all sorts of other reasons why Russia might not have chosen to invade Ukraine while Trump was in power, and chose a different date when Biden happened to be in power. So I think he again did a great job fooling people, and there's just total lack of critical thinking on these topics in the US, plus that cult-like phenomena that I talked about, where whatever he says is just not scrutinized enough. But if you listen to his debates, he kept hammering these points without any evidence, of course. Yeah, another one was, he's got a plan. He's got a plan. I listened to all his speeches. I listened to the debates, as I mentioned. Where's the plan? There's no plan. He says, I have a plan and it will be good. He was asked about climate change, and he said that when I left office, the air and water in America were clean. I mean, as if the air and water and global emissions follow presidential election cycles. But I find that, again, on that sociological point that I was making earlier, people tend to project whatever they wish to see in him on him. For example, I was with some young people the other day here in Australia, and I heard the guy telling the lady sitting next to him that I like Trump because he's good for the economy. Point in case, I don't think he was good for the economy, and certainly will not be good in the coming years either. And B, because he has a plan. And again, my question is, where's the plan? Again, this is not to say that the other side is necessarily much better. I think the other side does have a plan, by the way. I think Biden and Kamala Harris definitely have a plan on climate change. You can argue whether it's a good plan or not, but to attribute a plan to Trump is just foolish. But somehow, the 2 or 3% of swing voters. Remember, there's the 46% of committed voters that, yeah, I think even if you murder someone on TV, will not change their mind. But the 2 or 3% of swing voters that usually decide the American election clearly were swayed by all sorts of ridiculous claims that he was making that have no substance and no evidence to back them. And this sociological phenomena extends to the boundaries of lunacy. For example, on one of the I think debates, he said that the immigrants who are coming in, the illegal immigrants, which is of course a real problem in America. But please bear in mind, illegal immigration has always been a big problem in America. It has certainly spiked during the current administration, for which the current administration can be held to account to some extent. But again, just like I said, correlation is not causation. It's not only because the Democrats are in power that all this is happening. And plus, it's very hard to fix that problem irrespective of who's in office. But going back to the point I was making, if you think about the things he said, for example, I remember he said that the immigrants from Haiti, which is a small impoverished island off the coast of North America towards the south, these people come in and they eat the pets and the dogs of Americans. This is something that he said on TV. So now illegal immigration is not the problem. Illegal immigrants eating the dogs of Americans became a problem. And again, he's just held to a different standard, or I would say there is just no standard to which he's held. Any other person saying things like this would definitely see some sort of a blip in his or her performance as a presidential candidate. But in Trump's case, either nothing changes or he becomes more popular. And again, this is just that point I'm making about how he just defies all sorts of conventional norms of sociology and politics. Now, he was, of course, helped to a great extent by the Democrats and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, etc. And I want to spend a few minutes on why I think they fared poorly, and how their ineptitude in many areas also helped Trump, especially with that 3% swing vote. Now, first, I want to say, and this is my personal opinion, I don't think Biden was as bad as people made him out to be. I listened again to both the debates. While I found him sometimes to be linguistically challenged, or mixing up his words, etc., he at least knew what he was talking about. I mean, Trump had no idea what he was talking about. So if I had to choose between the two on any matter of policy, whether it was climate change, whether it was wars, whether it's the economy, I would choose Biden any day on the basis of the fact that at least he knew what he was talking about. Trump simply did not, and offered no sort of plan, as I mentioned earlier. Now, having said that, I think the primary reason why the Democrats have lost the plot in the U.S. is that there is a silent protest. There's a silent protest because the Democrats have gone too far to the left, aka they are in this very sort of unnatural alliance with the woke movement or the ultra leftists. So they can't decide who a man is, who a woman is. There are states where kids can go and get gender change surgeries done without parental consent. There were Democrat states where during COVID for 2.5 years schools were closed down with very little consideration for what the long-term implications on society and children might be. There's a bloated bureaucracy. There is an allegation, and there's some truth to it, that the Democrats are soft on illegal immigration. By the way, on immigration, it's worth pointing out that the main problem in America, in my opinion, is legal immigration. And no one talks about that. The legal immigration system is also broken. America is built on the backs of legal immigrants, from the Sundar Pichais of the world to the Elon Musks of the world. They're legal immigrants, and at the moment, that system is also broken. And that system gets further damaged because of illegal immigration. But they're two separate issues, but somehow the focus is only on one. Now, going back to what I was saying, the Democrats are definitely a little bit soft on illegal immigration. If you're an Indian watching this, it's a little bit like the Congress and the Bangladeshi problem in India, because they feel that as those people settle and become regularized, sort of naturalized U.S. citizens, which is not very hard to do historically in America, then they're cultivating a vote base for themselves. There are some extreme examples, by the way. For example, in the state of California, there's the governor, Gavin Newsom, and this will tell you how far left and how idiotic the Democratic Party has become. But in California, it is actually illegal to ask for voter identification when you actually go and vote in the elections. Now, again, to someone who was born and raised in India and I live in Australia now, this is just insane. You have to prove who you are before you can actually go and vote. But in California, you don't have to. And actually, in many parts of the US, you don't have to. But in California, it's actually illegal for the official to even ask you this question. So you simply can go there and swear an oath and say that I hereby declare I'm an American citizen, and you'll be given the ballot paper and you can vote. Now, this of course can lead to lots of non-citizens voting, which again goes back to this point of cultivating the point that I was making around the Democrats potentially cultivating a vote bank for themselves. Now, again, I don't have any sort of evidence or big sort of conspiracy theory here that this is what caused the swing the last time around or something. But the fact is that to any sort of sane mind, I think there should be a question there around how can you allow someone to vote without verifying who they are. That process might have worked 200 years ago or something, but surely it can't work anymore. A couple of other areas I think where Democrats struggle. If you followed Kamala Harris's campaign, she talked about the abortion issue because Trump's appointees at the Supreme Court obviously overturned the famous Roe versus Wade judgment, which means abortion is now a state issue, which by the way I think constitutionally is sound. But anyway, Kamala Harris made that a big sort of issue. Now, I think that was a mistake, and I think that was an issue. That was while it was an emotive issue for some people, it was never going to be a mass issue, because what percentage of people and families and women will ever need to go through an abortion, even in a country like America where you've got lots of single parents and unplanned pregnancies, etc. I mean, maybe 1%. I'm probably being very generous there. So yes, for those people, it is a significant issue, and I do have an opinion on that. But I think Kamala Harris made two major mistakes there. One is that she tried to turn it into a mass issue, which it never was, and never will be, because there's just ways around it, right? I mean, you can have family planning. Firstly, a lot of people might never need to. You can have family planning. You can go to a different state. You can use contraceptives. All sorts of ways in which people can deal with the fact that abortion might not be allowed in their state, even though I don't think it's tenable on the grounds that people argue for an abortion ban. So I think that was a mistake. The other mistake I think she made, which was a very sort of, I saw this as a character trait of Kamala Harris, is that she tried to reconcile issues that couldn't be reconciled. So on abortion and guns, for example, right? On abortion, she's trying to reconcile the Christians' problem, the argument, which is that okay, you can't take a child's life, etc., and the idea that a fetus is a child, with women's health. So if you listen to Kamala Harris very carefully, she's talking repeatedly about it's a women's health issue. It's not a women's health issue. It is a head-on question around Christian dogma and modern values, and freedom of choice for any adult. And the collision there is not between expert opinions and what the doctor thinks versus what the government should do. The collision is very much between Christian doctrines here in this case, or any religious doctrines, but in this case it happens to be Christianity, and the nature of society today, which is at odds with Christianity in many ways. And I think she was trying to reconcile these two unsuccessfully. The same problem she faced with energy. She used to be a very sort of ardent opponent of fossil fuels and fracking, etc., which I think you can make a case for that. And then she tried to argue that with innovation and unlocking energy supplies in America and being energy independent, etc., because she was being beaten on that topic by the Republicans, as so was Joe Biden, his predecessor. And so again, I don't think the policy was clear. And then lastly, another example there was, so I talked about guns. Guns is another one, right? Now, Republicans are clear. They say it's the Second Amendment right. And the ultra-right within them say that it's not even a Second Amendment right. It's a God-given right to protect their families, etc. Now, the Democrats, instead of actually taking that head on and saying something, my argument would be, who cares? It's the Second Amendment right. I mean, remove it. Not everything that the founding fathers said or added to the Constitution is going to always be true. But they're too scared to say that. So they introduce all this sort of stealth bureaucracy in terms of background checks and identification. They don't want identification for voters in a national election, you see, but they want identification and background checks for someone who purchases a gun. And so again, this is an example of the vacillating and hiding from the main issue and trying to reconcile two virtually irreconcilable points, at least in my opinion. So I think this also let them down because it was just a very mixed message that really didn't appeal to anyone. And lastly, I just want to briefly though say that having said all that, the idea that the Democrats lost and the Republicans won in a landslide because there's the electoral college system in America, that is still not true. Because remember, even in this election, even though from an electoral college perspective, which Trump has won very sort of convincingly, the popular vote is the truest measure of how popular a person is as a percentage of the population, right? And the state's electoral college ensures that every state has an equal sort of not an equal but has some say in it, because otherwise the states with the biggest population will get the biggest say. So to balance that out, you have the system, which I think is fine. But in this election, where apparently Donald Trump routed Kamala Harris, what was the spread? The spread was, I think, 46.2% of America voted for Kamala Harris, and 49.9% voted for Donald Trump. We are talking about a 2.7 percentage point difference. That's it. By the way, that difference is less than the difference. I want to stress it's less than the difference by which, or the margin by which Joe Biden beat Donald Trump last time around. So if someone is arguing that Donald Trump totally destroyed the Democratic Party in this election, well, then that same argument should have been made when Biden defeated Trump. Now, they don't make that argument because of this whole electoral college system. But I mean, in terms of how many people voted for them, remember, both parties have committed voter bases. Like I said a little while earlier, it's that 2 to 3% of the swing vote. And you can see that, Trump, when he lost to Biden, I think he was somewhere at 46% himself, 46.2 or 46.4. And he's managed to move that up by around 3 percentage points this year. Which is of course commendable, but it's hardly the sort of landslide that people make it to be. In conclusion, I just want to kind of pose the hypothetical question, as a student of politics and as someone who's lived in the U.S. and I'm very favorably disposed to the U.S. in general. I think it's an amazing country with some very remarkable sort of characteristics that we could learn from. If I was asked this question of who would you vote for, and in this current climate, I must be very clear, I very much lean conservative, especially in the economic side, but even on the social side these days, because the other side has gone crazy. I mean, if someone can't figure out who a man is, who's a woman, and transgenders and all this sort of nonsense, and this becomes the presidential and national sort of topic of discussion, I think there's something wrong. So even in this climate, so I'm just stressing this because I really find it very hard to think on the sides of with the Democrats at the moment, given their sort of social positions, and you can talk about other things like the war in Hamas, Israel, and the support for Hamas on the college campuses, which is a direct sort of result of this whole woke virus, as Elon Musk puts it. But I still can't vote for Donald Trump. I still couldn't in this hypothetical sort of election that I'm playing in my head. And the reason for that, there are two or three things. One is that I think he's destroyed the conservative platform. I said at the start, he's not a conservative. He's not even a Republican. He's just using that platform because it's very hard to be an independent in America. You need one of the two big parties to win. Another example was Bernie Sanders, right? And Bernie Sanders is not a Democrat either. He says I'm a socialist, but if he has to choose amongst the two parties, he needs to use the Democratic Party in his case, to use as a platform. So I think he's destroyed the platform. I think there are many, many good Republican leaders who would have been better than Trump. And as a matter of fact, there are many who do oppose him. In fact, many senior people in his own administration have gone to great lengths to describe what a megalomaniac and nutcase he is. And these are very staunch Republicans I'm talking about, from John Bolton to the former chief of their Joint Defense Forces to the Homeland Secretary, and all sorts of very, very significant Republicans who held very important positions and worked. Mike Pence, the vice president, they've made it clear that it is a very bad idea to support this guy. So that tells me something. But unfortunately, that cult that I described earlier is still too powerful, and these voices have been silenced. And I think that's a problem. Remember, even this Donald Trump didn't even go to any of those debates when the other Republicans were debating amongst themselves, like Vivek Ramaswamy and Ron DeSantis, etc. Um, and he was just holding his own rallies because he has self-declared to his cult that he's going to be the nominee anyway, which he turned out to be. But I mean, he was not interested in talking to anyone else, which hardly sounds like a very democratic sort of approach to me. The other thing, because we're talking about democracy, is that I think this phenomena in his election is a severe blow to democracy. And I want to stress this is not for all the reasons that I don't see this as being the case for all the reasons that you hear on the Democratic side. So this idea that he's a fascist, that he's going to deport 11 million people, which by the way he can't, he just simply can't. How will you get hold of them? And as if all those countries where they have come from are waiting to accept them with open arms, it's just impossible. These are just election slogans. But the idea that he is a threat to democracy for the obvious reasons is not the argument I'm making. I'm saying that he's permanently damaging American democracy for reasons such as, he refuses to talk to anyone else. He refuses to commit to a peaceful transfer of power. Remember, he said he had won the previous election, refused to concede. He even refused to say before the current election that if he loses, he will graciously agree defeat. And I just feel that these sort of things actually undermine the trust in the sort of democratic setup. I think he's also, I think he's not very bright, which I don't think is a crime. And I think there are lots of politicians who are not very bright. But this idea that people think he's very bright because he's so stupid that people look at him and go, oh, surely he can't be so stupid, so he must be a genius. This is the Occam's razor sort of explanation here. Unfortunately, it is as bad as it appears. He is so stupid. But it's not just the stupidity. He casts this sort of spell on people around him that turn them into people who can't think, and in some ways demands a certain level of servitude from them, which I think is again very bad for democracy in general. And last thing I want to mention is the on this topic is that if you find yourself in a position where, like I said at the start of this video, roughly 46% of the country will not change their opinion irrespective of what. That, I think, is the death of democracy. That is the single most important characteristic that in my mind tells you the health of a nation's democracy and sort of electoral process, etc. Because I think people ought to change their mind on both sides, depending on what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what they're being told, what they're being advised, etc. And if that delta is limited to 3% in a country of 330 million, then I think we have a problem. Now, apart from all that, I just find that he's also, not a very sort of courteous person. He doesn't know how to speak. He says stupid things. He just lacks basic decency and humility. And I think that does America, a country for which I have a very high regard, a very big disservice, because I think the American people are much better, and I've lived there and I've been interacted with hundreds of them. I think they're just much better than what Donald Trump represents to the modern world today as their new president-elect. So I hope you found some of these sort of points nuanced and offered a unique perspective on things. And if you did, please let me know what your thoughts are. I might do a follow-up after he becomes the president on what his first 90 days might be and the supposed claims that he's made. I mean, he said all sorts of things, right? He's gonna deport 11 million people. He's gonna stop the Ukraine-Russia war. He's going to stop the Israel-Palestine war. He's going to make him clean up the air and water in America the day he takes office. I mean, he says whatever he wants to say. Of course, no one holds him to account. But I might do another video once he is in office, and he has a little bit of at least some kind of a plan that he puts out to the people as part of his policies, and we can review and critique those decisions independently. But till then, thanks for tuning in, and do let me know what your thoughts were. Have a nice day.